Welcome. So we're here to talk about millages. I assume that if you are on this call, you are thinking about a millage maybe this year or in the next year. What I love about the library community is it's not uncommon for me to get a call this year and have a library say, I've got a millage coming up in 2025. I want to start working ahead of time. Some of our other clients will call me the week before the ballot deadline is due, and typically you don't get that from libraries. So I know there may be some of you that have it this year. Some of you maybe are thinking about it for future years. Okay, there we go. Okay. So one of the things that you have to be concerned about when requesting a millage is what authority you have to levy a millage. Because the worst thing you could do is put a ballot proposal on the ballot that doesn't comply with Michigan law. And so it's important to determine, based on what type of library you are, what your authority is. And libraries, public libraries in Michigan, except for school libraries, all have some type of authority to levy a millage. It just depends on what type you are. So if you are a district library, Section 13 of the District Library Establishment Act provides that specific authority for you to levy a millage. All or part of the money necessary for the establishment and operation of a district library may be supplied by a tax levied by the district library. Taxable value of the property, that's the basis on which they calculate, how much, the money is raised. It's how many mills based on the taxable value of property. For district-wide levies, so district libraries have a couple, basically two different options for levying a millage. One, their individual participating municipalities can levy a millage to support it, and those would be individual, if you have two townships, for example, that form your district library, each township would go on the ballot as a township millage to support the district library. The other way is the more popular is the district-wide millage. This allows you to levy a millage uniformly in your district. So it applies to your entire district, same millage rate, up to 2 mills in perpetuity, and you can have another 2 mills levied for not more than 20 years. Most millages in Michigan, other than certain library millages, and there are some exceptions, are required to have a 20-year limitation. So having the ability to have a perpetual millage is in and of itself a little bit of a benefit for libraries. Some of you may have those perpetual millages. Some of you do not. When I first started representing libraries, I did quite a few perpetual millages. And then I think people got nervous with the economy that they wouldn't pass. So I haven't seen those as much lately. They're starting to creep back in a little bit, but you do have the authority to levy up to 2 mills in perpetuity and another 2 mills for not more than 20 years. I want to raise the 4 mill limitation here for the township libraries and city libraries that are out there, because we're going to talk to you about your authority. And I guess spoiler alert, townships, PA 164 libraries have a 2 mill limitation. And there are communities, a number of communities that I work with that are butting up against the 2 mills. And 2 mills may not be enough, depending on the taxable value in your jurisdiction. So I do want to point that out, because one of the benefits, if you're considering going to a district library establishment formation, this is one of those benefits if that happens to be you. One, if you extend your territory into a district by maybe joining with another municipality, that you have a bigger tax base. The other issue is that even if you stay your same size or close to your same size, you have the ability to ask for additional millage. I had a question about a perpetual millage, and then a unit drops out of the district. Is that perpetual millage still part of that unit's obligation? I want to clarify unit, because only participating municipalities can withdraw from a district library. And so let's say you have a school district, and the school district is your participating municipality, and it has 3 townships in it, township A, B, and C. If those townships are not municipalities or participating municipalities, meaning a signer of your district library agreement, they don't have authority to come out of your district, okay? So I want to make that clear, but let's just say Township A is also a signatory of the agreement, and they decide that they want to withdraw from the district library. One of the conditions of withdrawal of the district library is that they continue to pay the millages for the duration of the millage. So basically, if you have a perpetual millage, that municipality is required to pay that millage in perpetuity. Now, a lot of perpetual millages that have been around for a while a lot of those communities don't only have that perpetual millage. They're starting to ask for new additional millages on top of that. And the community would not be responsible for those. The flip side too is that the district library will be required to provide service for those same residents in response to that perpetual millage, which I think raises an interesting issue. If the perpetual millage is very small, and it doesn't account for a lot of funding, there might be that I think that's going to be an issue that might come up down the line with what service do you have to provide those people. For example, if the perpetual millage is 0.2 mils and the total millage rate of the library is 1.2 mils, does that 2 mil get them equal service? I think that's and Clare knows of something that might be a kind of a issue of first impression. But a little beyond the scope of the question, but it has a lot of layers to it. So that's something certainly that it's very important if you're in that situation that you educate your participating municipalities about the effect, because I have talked to a few participating municipalities that put the ballot on the ballot to remove themselves from the district, and we're not aware that they would still be paying the millage after the fact. So that's something that's a little education piece for those involved if that happens to be your situation. If it's district-wide, the entire district must be levying the same millage. I've done a number of amendments to district library agreements lately where they add a participating municipality. They have to approve, in order as a condition to becoming a member of the district, they have to approve the same millage as the millage rate of the library that they're joining. And I have seen situations where there's been issues. Let's say that, just to use whole numbers, that the millage rate of the district is 1.2 mils, but it's been rolled back to 1 mil. When you join a district, you levy you enter at the same rate, which would be 1.2 mils. That's what the ballot language will say, but the actual levy has to be equal to the 1 mil that the district is levying. So if you have a situation like that, I would talk to your lawyer about the correct millage rate once it goes in, because sometimes I've seen situations where there's different millage rates depending on the different rollbacks, or the treasurer doesn't understand, or the county, that it's a district library and levies the individual millages differently. If it's a district-wide millage, it has to be the same and uniform throughout the district. The district library board establishes the amount and duration of the millage, which is an advantage over some types of library formation types, PA 164 city libraries, for example. And the district library board submits the question to voters. So a common question I have is, do you need the authority from your participating municipalities to put a ballot proposal on? And the answer is no, you don't. That's entirely within the discretion of the district library board as to when and where they put their proposal on. So the other, I guess there's really, we have several different types of formations, but district libraries and PA 164 libraries are the other type of libraries that have a lot of millage issues. I'm talking now about village or township libraries under Section 10 or city libraries under Section 10A. These are the libraries that have an elected board and are formed initially by petition of 50 voters and have a tax. Again, if you're a Section 10 or 10A library, the tax is not more than 2 mils. This is where your 2 mil limitation. And it was raised. Claire, I don't remember when that was. It was 1 mil for a long time, and then it was raised at some point. 80s maybe. And
it was I believe it was in the 90s.
90s. It was moved up to 2 mils, so that might be something that would be, considered if it's if we need to start looking at that as a legislative fix. But I digress, because right now it's still at 2 mills. And with PA 164 libraries, the library itself is named in the ballot proposal, but the taxing entity is the city or the township or the village. So the ballot proposal will say, if you're a township library, shall the township of, and then whatever your township, levy the millage in support of the library. So it doesn't look like a library millage as much. It looks more like a township millage, but that's something that if you have any questions, certainly your attorney can help you. One of the advantages of a 10 and 10A is that once the petition is formed, the original petition to form your library states the amount of the millage and the duration of your millage. After that, the library board gets to determine the amount of the millage. This is really important, I think, from an authority perspective, because a common problem with PA 164 is that they are treated as a department of the township, city, or village. And because of that, sometimes they don't understand that they are the ones, the library board is the one that gets to decide how much millage. And that what the statute says is once the resolution is passed by the board, the township, village, or city shall place it on the ballot. I would say when I started doing this work, we always had the library board pass the resolution, and then the township, city, or village would rubber stamp it to put it on the ballot. We have moved away from that a little bit, partly in response to a case I worked on in the city of Troy. Oh my gosh, it's been 10 years now. But the petition was formed, submitted to the city. City refused to act on it. So what do? So the Oakland County Election Commission determined that the city did not need to act on it. I raise this because this is one of those little procedural issues that if you are a PA 164 library and you haven't gone for a millage, or you're thinking about a millage, this is one of those areas where I don't like to come up to a ballot deadline and have controversy or concern about this. Many communities, we do now just have the library board pass the resolution, it's submitted to the township clerk, let's say, and the township clerk puts it on the ballot. There are still communities that think or believe, or at least the township wants them to come in front of the township and have the township approve that. It's not necessarily wrong. It's a belt and suspenders approach, but here's where the problem can lie. One, what if the township doesn't want to do it? Or what if the township wants to change your ballot language or change the amount you're asking for? So there could be some tension there, and there might have to be some education that, look, maybe in the years past, we've sent it to the township and they rubber stamp it and put it on the ballot, but it's not a necessary requirement anymore. So that's just something to consider if you're a PA 164 library, that there might be that slight entanglement with your municipality if there's a millage issue. So to think about that a little bit ahead of time. Section 1 of PA 164 for city libraries. City libraries have a very, very unusual authority. It's a city may levy up to 1 mill without a vote of the public annually. And so this is something that the city council can do on a year-to-year basis and determine may levy 1 mill without a vote. PA 164 libraries can also ask for a second mill, but that second mill must be voted. This one is not in the discretion of the library board. This one is in the discretion of city council. Problems with it, pros and cons. If you are a PA 164 library and you can live within the 1 mill means, it's great. You never have to go back to the voters. City can levy it annually every year. You never have to go back from voters. It's paid for and collected just as if a township or a city approved tax would be. The cons are that depending on what the city's how the city treats the library or what the city believes the library's value is, this is one of those areas that we've seen cities decide, well, normally, we're authorized to levy 0.8, but we think you guys are too rich. We think you have too much of a fund balance. We think, you're not a necessary service. We don't want our citizens paying for library. We'd rather have them paying more money for, let's say, something like fire or police. If that happens, then the library board is without much recourse. You have exclusive authority to spend the money within, so once it hits the township fund, then the library has exclusive authority to spend it. The problem is that the city has the exclusive authority to determine how much to levy each year. This is one of the reasons why often cities either convert to district, or cities either go to district or they convert to a 10A. Yeah, I just want to clarify, a section 10A city can't levy a mill without a vote. You have to be a section 1 city library. Claire, is that your understanding?
Yeah, with the appointed board.
Yeah, with the appointed board. So one of the things, and Claire is wonderful with this homework. I think I say this in most webinars that I do. Well, that Claire's wonderful. I think that goes without saying, but that if you don't know who you are or what you are, reach out to Claire. We can help you try to figure out what you are, because there's still some libraries in Michigan. They're getting fewer and fewer because of all the work I think the Library of Michigan has done, and the library community, and trying to figure out what you are. But trying to find yourself in a library with perspective is very important, because again, as you can see, it really depends on the authority of what you have. It's very important to know what kind of library you are. County libraries. Do we have any county libraries here? I can't tell from the limited. I won't spend a lot of time. The County Library Act is in 1917, I believe, and it's very. One county library. Shout out to the county library on the call. This is something. This is I'm giving you here. This is what the statute says. This is something I would talk to your lawyer about. Because we're doing a little bit more research into what your authority is as a county library, but that's something that the county can levy a millage in support of the county library. That's clear. The mechanisms for that and how it goes about and what you need to do is something that's a little bit more nuanced. So if you are a county library going for a millage, I would reach out to the your county attorney or county library attorney, whatever you have, to kind of talk about what the parameters are, what the vote, if the vote is required, what it looks like, and those types of things. So this is one of these areas that's sort of emerging, even though it's an 1917 statute. We're just really starting to think about some of the millage issues here. So how much? And I just share this because, as the lawyer, that's really, I'm not the numbers person. Sometimes you hire, financial people to determine, especially if you're using the millage to support a building, that should really be someone you hire a professional to determine how much, so that you can pay debt service on a bond, for example. But other things to consider. I raise this because one of the things that I get is that what effect does that our endowment have, or our fund balance have? And that's one of the things that your voters, or if there's a municipality in your area that doesn't like you going out for a millage, they're going to point out to voters that you have a huge fund balance. And so that's something to consider when you talk about your amount of the election. And there's a bullet point that I have been meaning to add, and I did not add it, so I will just tell you, consider the cost of your election. And that's something that most libraries go at an election, they figure out, to kind of piggyback on, you usually have to pay your, incremental costs of the election, for example, but usually you piggyback on a primary or other general election, at least an August or November election. A lot of times there's not very many additional costs. If you are a county library, or you have especially any library, but if you have a large district, I would recommend that you contact your county before to get the costs. I mean, we had a situation, I think very recently with the client, where we were all set to go ahead on a ballot, and the cost was in the tens of thousands of dollars to put the ballot on at that particular election, because it was the only thing on the ballot. So that's something to consider too, is the cost of the election when you're considering when to put it on as part of it. Are you willing to incorporate that into the amount of what you're asking for? I get a lot of questions. I'm sure Claire gets a lot of questions. I know people who are involved in millage campaigns get these questions about how much, how long, what's normal, what's the normal amount of time, what are other libraries committees doing? And this is one of those things that's, to me, it's very specific to your area. If you are a library that has a 75% pass rate on your library millages, or all millages, let's say, and that's been consistent for the last 15 years, you may consider, it might not matter to you as much when it goes on or how much you ask. If you have millages that pass as a razor thin margin, it may make a difference that it's a 5-year millage versus a 10-year millage. You might not have voters that want to commit that far out in advance. And so that's something that's really going to be specific to your library. Also, Headley rollbacks. There were about, in the late, 2000s, we didn't really worry about Headley rollbacks too much. The economy was so bad that there were no rollbacks. Rollbacks have really come into play again. Whether they affect they're affected by this year's economy, that's another thing. It's hard to predict. That's something more that your equalization might have some estimates on, and other things like that. And yeah, Claire, if you guys are looking at the chat, talk to your accountant about having capital project funds in a balance separate from your main balance fund. That's very good advice. Again, long-term plans. We're going to get a little bit into the millage, but for example, if you're a district library, there's many district libraries that have not been successful with what we call a full faith and credit bond, which is a bond, your typical bond that you see to build a building. That in the full faith and credit bond, you're asking voters to pay the debt service on the bond, and whatever the debt service is, the library can raise in that year. There's other libraries that have gone for more traditional millages, 1 mil, 2 mil, a limited amount of millage. So you can only levy, no matter how much, the interest is on the bonds or anything that happens to them, you can only levy that 1 mil or 2 mils or 4 mils, whatever it is. But when you talk about, if you're using the money for that purpose, I would think about the duration and make sure it really is something that works for your bond. If you've got a 30-year bond as a PA 164 library or as a district library, you can have a 30-year millage. You can have perpetual millages, so you can have, up to 2 mils for districts and up to 2 mils for PA 164, 10 and 10A libraries. You can have 30-year millages. So maybe the millage is 30 years because that's the duration of the debt service that you're trying to pay back. And that's something that certainly should be explained to voters when you're doing your millage campaign. I'm gonna get into the millages. Millages, it's a little bit of a dry area for webinar sake. Some of this is a little bit tedious, but I point it out because often I do ballot proposals, and the libraries don't like the way it's worded, the way they think it looks too technical, or there's things in it that they would rather not say. And I want to point out what has to be included in the ballot language so you're prepared for that. Public Act 248 of 1999 provided information that must be in a ballot proposal. And, we're coming up on, that statute has been in existence for a long time. It took about 10 years for a lot of communities to pick up on some of the things that are required. I would say even now, there's some communities that are using old ballot language and aren't incorporating the new requirements in there. So when you see your ballot language and then you look at your neighbors and say, oh, why do we have to tell voters X? The local township or the village isn't telling their voters. The answer may be that they're just not simply in compliance with the act. So that's something to consider when putting together your ballot proposal. So the first thing that the statute requires is that you tell them what the millage rate is. And that is the amount that you see in ballot proposals is expressed in mils. A mil is 1/10 of a cent. So it's $1 per $1,000 of taxable value. So if you're asking for a half mil, that's 50 cents per $1,000 of taxable values. Make sure the written description matches the numbers. I'm not a big believer in taking your old ballot proposal and changing the numbers around. Only because in my own ballot proposal, they have changed over the years. There's things that I used to do 15 years ago that I no longer do because I've started to see things that have changed in the law. We want to make sure those were up in compliance, and that it's going to be a paragraph that you want to be as risk adverse to as possible, so that there's no challenges to the ballot language. So be careful when you're changing dates around and changing numbers, because if you miss one, then it's going to create confusion. For example, if you're asking for 1 mil and your ballot language says 1 mil, 50 cents per $1,000 of taxable value, the court will have to decide, well, did the voters think it was 1 mil or a half mil? And so that's a situation you don't want to find yourself in. We often use a not to exceed amount. So my old ballot, years and years ago, we used to say, shall the library, and some of them still do, just because it's, I think it's understood that you could levy less, but typically we say, instead of shall the library levy 1 mil, we say shall the library levy an amount not to exceed 1 mil, because there have been circumstances, if you get a huge donation or a huge bequest, and in one particular year you don't feel, maybe the economy's hurting and you don't feel your taxpayers can make a break, you might want to levy, less than that 1 mil. Now, if you did that, even without that language, if your language said 1 mil, I mean, you'd have to say, how risky is that? I mean, how many people would sue you to say, no, you have to levy the full amount of the mil? That's probably not likely to happen, but it could. So that's why we just, again, this is one of those things that we add just to be extra safe. Also, the estimated amount of revenue that will be collected in the first year that the millage is authorized and levied. So this is the expressed in terms of taxable value. And that's why you have to consider the year in which it will first be levied. There's a couple issues with going early. If you have your ballot, let's just say that you can still collect in 2023 and you want to put the ballot on in August of 2023, you still have 1 year left of your existing millage, and your new millage wouldn't start till 2024. There's a couple areas, and I'll talk about those, where you have to really keep that in mind. The other issue, but here with the estimated revenue, is that you typically, let's say that you have a ballot that is in May and of 2023, and you're not going to levy it until 2024. Most likely you're using the 2022 taxable value numbers, because those are the only numbers that you have to estimate what you'll collect in 2024. So oftentimes we will, I'll use a modest, 1.5% increase to, show that in 2024, what will the taxable value look like then? So that's something you could talk, it's going to be specific to your community, but just keep that in mind. That's one of those areas that going early might have to make you do a little bit more of an estimate to figure out what it would be later. There's a question about the fund balance. We have a fund that's equal to our budget, and as a request. This is kind of a, I don't know exactly. It would depend on what part is restricted or not restricted about what you can spend. But I think all money that the library has in its possession, whether it's, a bequest or whether it's, money set aside in a foundation, is all going to be considered should all be considered as to whether you go for a millage and what that millage should be. The duration of millage in years. I recommend using words and the actual numbers, and be very careful, because 20 years could be, most people think if it's 2023, it'll be done in 2043. Well, that's actually 21 years. If you I usually count on my fingers just to make sure that I've got them all, but because you count the first year and the last year, and that's usually, and so 2023 to 2042 would be 20 years of levies. I do want to point out for those of you who have, and I don't know that there are a lot of libraries in this situation anymore. There could be. I think millages over the last 20 years have been much shorter, 5-10 years. But I think back in the 80s and 90s, there's a lot of perpetual millages and a lot of 20-year millages. And that might have carried over a little bit into, the feeling even, 15 years ago, right? So if you have an existing millage, one of the homework pieces that I have is to pull that millage language out and make sure that you know exactly when your millage will end. So for example, let's say that your ballot proposal said incorrectly that it was for a period of 20 years, 2023 to 2043. The question is, can you levy in 2043? I would not recommend that because I think it's a 20-year millage and it's a typo error on the 42 versus 43. But you have to be careful, because if it's already 2043 and you didn't know that there was the error, then there's a question about whether you'd have a gap year of funding, because are you really authorized to levy that? So it's good to pull out your ballot proposal and to make sure you really understand when the last year of levy is. Some libraries may only levy a millage or portion of millage for a maximum of 20 years. Other libraries may be limited by charter. If you're a city library, always check your charter too, to make sure that there's no special charter provisions that you have to be aware of. That's just a special thing for city libraries. Also, consider the year consider the year that you want the initial levy. We talked a little bit about that. So you know when your current millage is up, know how many years you want to you want to have the levy, and so make sure that you have an appropriate first year of ballot. One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit here is that because we get this question quite a bit. If right now, if you in Michigan, if you have a ballot on a November election, general election, you can levy it for that year. That's something I would work on with the people involved in the millage. Anytime you're going for a millage, work with your local clerks so that they know the millage is coming. They know what your intent is. You don't want to get in an argument with them. If the ballot deadline is August 15th, you don't want to get into in an argument with them on August 17th about whether you can levy it that first year. And actually, even this year, I had to work through an issue like that with a clerk. So it's good to before the ballot deadline is, make sure that you've got that procedure in place. The other factor is for district libraries and this is something, especially if you're a new director within your district, you might not have really thought about yet, but some cities are required to levy in the summer. So if you have a city library or a district library that is composed of a city and a township, townships levy in December, city levies in the summer. District library's obligation is to levy the same amount in a calendar year at the same level. So if you have a levy in July, let's say the last year that the city can levy is in July, you have to be careful about those August and November elections, because you don't want to say that the first year of levy would be that November, because you've already missed the opportunity, or December 1 of that year, because you've already missed the opportunity for the city in that calendar year to levy the millage if they levy in the summer. So another kind of homework is figure out, are your district library taxes all on the same tax bill? If one's in the summer and one's in the winter, you might have to always go a year ahead of time to make sure that the millage is authorized by the first calendar year, and so that your city and your township can levy it uniformly. You have to have a clear statement of the purpose for the millage. And I've been doing a little bit of work on this lately just because of an issue that came up about a millage proposal. And Michigan law states that funds raised from millage may not be used for any purpose other than specifically set forth in the ballot language. For district libraries, typically what I would say is that it's all district library purposes authorized by law, for all purposes authorized by law. For other types of libraries, you might want to be careful because if you are a township that's going district or potentially going district during the term of the millage, you might not want to say, shall the millage be used in support of the specific township library or the specific memorial library, because there might be a question as to whether that's a limit intended to be limiting, not to use for district purposes, because the district library law says if you are a township that has if you're a PA 164 library that has a township millage in effect at the time the district is formed, you can still continue to levy that millage in support of the district unless the ballot proposal prohibits it. So for township libraries, even ones where I don't think that a district library is on the horizon, typically what I'll say is for, operating, instructing, purchasing for the township library and any other library purpose authorized by law. It's sort of a kitchen sink approach to make sure that you're not intentionally limiting yourself. If your intent is to have it as what we more traditionally think of as an operational millage or to run your library for all purposes. And we'll talk about titles a little bit, but just be careful when you're talking about the title for the purpose, because you don't want to say, for example, you don't want to say in the title that it's operating millage, but then the ballot language says it's for constructing. Those are two different things. They may appear contradictory. So just be careful about the titles and how you want to title it as an additional factor. Okay. So I give a couple examples as common problems, or maybe, and there may be, and I bring this up because there actually may be reasons why you would want to specifically limit it. The millage, we'll get to that in a minute. So the problem is we want to use money to operate a new building, but our ballot language only provides money for construction of a new library. Can the money for the operation of the library? The use of the fund, if you've just said it's for the construction of the library, the use for the operations might be subject to challenge. And if you have extra money that's not used for the purpose, it cannot be then transferred into your general fund for all purposes. It has to specifically be kept in escrow until you have that permitted purpose. Or again, I bring up this construction issue because sometimes libraries have two ballot proposals. They'll have a specific one just to pay for the construction of the building, and they'll have another one that's for operations. And so it may be an intentional thing that you do, but we just raise it because we want to make sure it is an intentional thing and not just something that is being done, for the sake of, because it really hasn't been thought about. 2 years ago, the voters approved a millage for 10 years to operate the John Doe branch of the Newtown District Library. We're considering closing the branch. Can we use the millage funds for other library purposes? Again, if you were very specific about that, I think you could be subject to challenge if you use it for other types of purposes. Again, you can make it more general. Sometimes you think you need to be specific in order to pass the ballot proposal, and that might be the case. So just consider that. Again, another one that you've just gone for a millage, an operational, you realize it's not enough. You want to go and ask voters for a specific use so that they know that this is what you're going to do with the money. Again, you can do that. Make sure that it's only used then for those purposes, so that you don't find yourself in violation or subject to challenge that you're not spending public money appropriately. The ballot language must also contain a clear statement indicating whether the proposed millage is a renewal of a previously authorized millage or an authorization of a new additional millage. And this is the area that I think most municipalities have that there's a lot of errors still in this, and this is where people are still just using their own ballot language because they don't understand what the AG and what the statute says. Okay, so to be a true renewal, it must be a renewal of the amount last levied. Okay, so for example, if voters originally authorized 1 mil years ago, but it's been reduced to 0.87 mil, the renewal must only be a renewal of 0.87. That additional 0.13 is called new additional millage. It's the Headley rollback amount. It's considered new millage under the law. So new millage, again, is any millage that's not that renewal part. And I do say you don't have to indicate that you have existing ballot language. Just for example, if you have a perpetual millage of 0.5 that's been rolled back to 0.3 and you want to go for an additional 0.5 mil, you don't have to tell voters, oh, hey, we're going for a new millage, but we also have to have this we also have this perpetual millage in place. That's not required by the statute. So the renewal, and I do want to raise, because usually when you have renewal, you really have a couple options, and sometimes you want to go for the renewal so that you can tell people it's a true renewal. And I'll get to a little bit how we handle that if you want to combine them in one ballot proposal. But the ballot shall also fully disclose each local unit of government to which the revenue from that millage will be dispersed. These are the definitions of local unit of government, and I'm going to highlight local authority created under state law, because that is authorities can include downtown development authorities, local development authorities, brownfield authorities. Those are the types of authorities that this statute is getting at. However, the library community went to great efforts, and as of January 1, 2017, any millages or renewals approved after that date are not captured by these 6 entities. So if your last proposal was from, let's just say it was in 2015, and you said our millage may be subject to capture by the city's DDA, you no longer have to tell voters that, because it is no longer subject to capture by the city's DDA. The one area, there's really two places I think that you really have to consider. One is brownfields. With the package of bills to exempt libraries from capture, they had a bill to exempt it from capture from brownfield redevelopment authorities, and that's the one that did not pass. If there's any new authorities that are created, we'll have to look whether the libraries have exemptions or not. But brownfield, if you still have a brownfield in your area, that will still have to be something you identify in your ballot. Even if your ballot is automatic, or your millage is automatically subject to exemption, the library and the authority can enter an agreement to allow capture. If you decide to do that, you have to put that DDA or LDFA or whatever it is on the ballot. So for example, let's say that let's just say that we have I was reading the question. That's my train of thought for a minute. Let's say that the city and the DDA agree to enter into that agreement to share taxes. Then you have to put it on there, and you have to explain that it was on that it will be subject to capture if you're allowing them to do it voluntarily. I want to answer a question about the DDAs. The answer is yes, we can talk about how to do that. Sometimes we do, if you look at Kent District Library's ballot proposal, their list of captures tended to be bigger. I suspect that by the time you don't need to list the cities and the districts that are in your district. What you would have to list are really just brownfields. And if you have the other areas, if you have a specific contract, for example, and the contract terms are something you should talk about with your lawyer, but if your contract is, we will give 0.2 mils of the millage we collect in this area to this other library, you may have to mention that you have contracts with other libraries for that. So if your millage is diverted to another entity, or if it's captured, that's where you might talk to your lawyer about whether it has to be noticed. For our last millage, we understand millage language was submitted first to approval by the county's prosecuting attorney. I don't know what type of library you're on. I've never heard of that before, unless the prosecuting attorney was just trying to help you as a lawyer. But there's no statute, Claire, if you can confirm, there's no statute. A district library, yeah, I don't know why that would have happened. That's not required at all by the statute. Interesting. But that's an area that I mentioned before, that if you have sort of a process that you've been working on, are working under. This is the point, if you're going to go in August, where I would approach whoever and say to the press, hey, prosecuting attorney, we realize you don't have to, because we don't want to have the ballot deadline pass and have the prosecuting attorney say it's not a valid ballot because I didn't approve it. So that's the type of thing we like to clarify. And can we run a renewal at Headley and a restoration to try to get out of the Headley rollback? Yes, and I will get to that in a minute. So let's put a pin in that question. I also want to point out that if you're a city library, there was a little bit of sausage making, let's say, in the final hours of those tax capture. And one of the issues is that certain city libraries have to require city approval before they get out of their millages. So if you're a Section 10A city library or even a Section 1, contact your library attorney to see if there's any specifics that would impact you on the millage capture or an agreement not to capture issue. Again, the ballot, the point is that there was the legislator that added this, voted on some millage and then realized like lots of the millage was being siphoned off by different entities for different purposes, and felt that was really not good for the voter knowledge. So voter education is really important with this, particularly for district libraries, because if you have a ballot and you have let's just say you are a county-wide district library, and one of your cities in the county has a brownfield. You might have townships that are why do I have to pay for the city's brownfield, or why are my taxes going to the city's brownfield? And so a little bit education, because it's only a certain amount of money that's captured within that district. And so there might have to be some education. I think it was a lot more problematic when DDAs captured and LDFAs, because those are the big ones that are in a lot of communities and sometimes can be controversial entities in themselves. So I think the legislation that passed a while ago, I think, has really helped with that. The issue about asking for the renewal and the new millage is kind of dependent on the answer to this question. Can you ask for a renewal? If you're going for a straight renewal, obviously that's one question. But how do you recapture if your millage has been drawn down by Headley and subject to those rollbacks? How do you recapture it back to its original state? Well, what the statute says is that a taxing unit that levies a millage shall not submit a question to the electors asking for both a renewal and a new millage if the new millage is greater than 0.5 mil. So that's really the determining factor. So let's say that a library has previously approved 1.5 mils for 20 years and the millage expires this year. The library currently levies 0.97 mil due to the Headley Amendment rollbacks. If we want to ask for the restoration back to the 1.5 mil, do we need one or two questions? If you want to characterize the 0.97 as a renewal, you'd actually need two questions, because as you can see, the 0.53 mil is in excess of that 0.5 threshold of where you can have it in one question. Same scenario, you ask voters for renewal of a previously authorized millage and the amount lost due to the Headley Amendment, and it's a 1 mil original millage that's been reduced to 90. You can ask the voters to renew the 0.9 mil and approve the 1 mil in the same question. And so some of this is a little bit of strategy. Okay, so let's say that I'm going to go back. Let's say this is your situation. You're the 0.15 library. Okay, what are your options? One is you can have two questions. You can ask for the 0.97 or as a renewal and the 0.53 is new millage. Your other option is to not ask for the full 1.5 mils, is to ask for 0.97 and 0.5 mils, the maximum that you can get in one question. The third option is there's no restriction for you characterizing all 1.5 as new additional millage. You can always say, if you want to use that renewal term, which is very important to a lot of communities, this isn't the option for you. But if you feel like you want to get back to the 1.5, you don't want to have a lot of issues with the language, you can always ask for the whole thing as new millage. What we typically do, going back to this 0.9 mil, is that we would say in the ballot language, shall the library levy, for example, if it's a district library, 1 mil, of which 0.9 mil is a renewal of the previously authorized millage that expires or expired in X and give the date, and the 0.10 mil is new additional millage. The way you describe the new additional millage, really, that's one of the areas you can really kind of be flexible. Sometimes people like to say it's due to the loss of the Headley rollback or something like that. I kind of have mixed feelings because I'm not really sure how much the average voter understands the Headley Amendment. So referencing the Headley Amendment in your ballot language sometimes is really not plain writing. So that's one thing. If you think that's really important for your community, there's language that we use, to restore the amount originally authorized or something like that, instead of just saying because of Headley rollbacks, because your average voter might not understand what that means. So those are some of the ways you can finesse the language to your own taste if you want to do it in there. The library must adopt a resolution to place the question on the ballot. That's in all sets for PA 164 and for district libraries. And only 2 millage elections can take place within 1 calendar year. This is a tricky one. District libraries are fine because you are your own taxing entity, so you can decide what 2 elections you want to pick. If you're a city or township, and I'm surprised this hasn't come up more, and maybe people just haven't really thought about it. Maybe it's been violated and people haven't realized it. But if you are a city or township millage, as I mentioned before, the language is it's shall the township, authorize the levy, or shall the township levy the amount. If you want to go in May and the township's planning on having an election in August, you might want to be a little careful, because if one or both of those millages fail, there's not an option to go back in November, since you can only have 2 millage elections in 1 calendar year within the same township or village. Again, I'm surprised. I don't know, Claire, have you had that issue come up? Oh, you're on mute. I think she's saying no, she hasn't seen it. So, okay. But that's just one thing again, there's some sort of pre-planning checklists, contact your local municipality, find out, agree upon the procedure and go accordingly. But this is one of those areas too that you might want to check out. This is where, as an English major, I used to have to do a lot of math, and it really scared me, because I would have to be the one to count back, 70 days or how many days within it, it depends. And it's very confusing, because I think I actually just worked on one where the city charter had different provisions too than the election law. And so you had to really kind of figure out you kind of go for the deadline that's the least harmful, the first deadline. So you don't, there's no question that that's the deadline you want to go for. But the Secretary of State publishes an election calendar for each election, and you should consult with that election calendar. There's a little trip up that happens a lot, and you just have to be aware of it. On the election calendar, there's a date for petitioning for a local proposal, and then 2 weeks later is the date for the resolution of the ballot. Petitioning is not what most libraries are going to do. You're going to adopt a resolution. The petition would be one, if you're going to create a new PA 164 library, you have to submit a petition with the ballot language on. That's the petition deadline. And then 2 weeks later, you have to submit the resolution, which is the actual ballot language, approval of the ballot language. So again, I've had a lot of county clerks who incorrectly tell municipality, like a district library that's already established and going for a renewal, that they have to have it by X date, which is the petition date and not the ballot approval date. So again, there's no harm in having it ahead of time, but it can cause an inconvenience maybe if your meeting schedule doesn't line up for that. So actual ballot language should be approved by the resolution of the library board. I don't like conceptual ballot language. So I often have a community say, well, our board voted that we were going to levy 1 mil for 10 years, but you didn't actually see the language. I really am a firm believer that the resolution should have the actual language in that. so that the people can see it, you can see the way it's worded, and those issues. For district libraries, if you have a district or if you have a school district, the ballot proposal also has to be sent to your school district election coordinator. Often that's the county clerk. But again, extra pre-millage thing you should look into. The resolutions that I draft, for example, for school district libraries say that we're going to send it to them. And then we figure out who that person is. It's again a belt and suspenders approach, but that's required by the statute to submit it to the school district election coordinator. So we have that as a requirement.
Hey, Anne,
yeah.
There's a question on the chat about contracted service area. So if you have a contract with a municipality that requires them to pay a millage, like I can't imagine that you'd have to share your ballot language. Hey Lauren, is it that your millage is being levied in the contracted areas?
Yeah, a little clear. Is that the disclosure of the contract on the ballot language, or is that an approval issue?
No, we're negotiating contracts right now, and they're basically saying that they aren't going to do it unless the people petition for them to put language up for a vote. So,
well,
well, that would be but that would be their millage. Then it wouldn't be the library's millage,
right? So that it has nothing to do with us. They just have to figure that out on their own.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think just speaking off it, if it's a city, there are typically city charter provisions that allow citizens to petition something, but typically everywhere else it's a decision of the township board or city council or city commission to authorize the millage language. And so it's kind of sounds like it might be a political
yes, they're basically just copping out. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might know which one this is.
You might want to call their bluff if they don't actually have the authority to or the petition, but because it has to be the statute if it's PA 160, but that's forming a new township library. So I'd have to look. I can't remember if PA 164 has other petitioning requirements in section 14. I can't remember. Yeah, but if that's something they're doing, maybe a little research to figure out if it makes it sounds like a political issue rather than a legal issue. So certainly let us know if we can help. I know you had a whole thing on campaign finance already, Claire, or is that the one coming up? I can't remember the order of the.
That's the next one next week.
Okay,
it's primarily yes committees.
Okay.
And like marketing and stuff. So I don't know how much they're going to delve into the question of, I'm sure they'll talk about as far as the ballot question committee is the spending. I'm not sure exactly if they're going to go into a lot of detail with the library stuff. So it doesn't hurt to.
Well, I'll give you a couple bullet points to think about, and maybe it'll lead you to some, if you're attending that, to kind of think about some questions you might want to ask when you kind of drill down on the specifics. The Michigan campaign finance laws apply to library millage elections. I recommend always that you seek attorney review of your millage materials because especially it's really hard because some of them are actually written by professional PR people. It's like I tell you, it's soul crushing when I get those professionally written pieces and they're beautiful and I start redlining them. And one of the ones I hate redlining out is the one where it says our library staff is the best in the state. Because when you have the finance laws that require you, if you're going to use public money, and I'm not talking about ballot question committee, so that's it. But if you're using the library's public money, it has to be neutral and factual. Don't put anything in a ballot. If you're spending public money on it, don't put anything in that material that you can't really back up by facts and statistics. So if let's just say that your staff won the national ALA Best Staff of the World Award, you can say our library won this award, but saying best staff is opinion rather than fact, even if you have a great staff. So that's why it's hard to sometimes it's hard, and the other thing you have to steer away from is if you pass the millage, we will do this. Because again, that's aspirational and not factual, unless you have, for example, sometimes I'll have the library board say, if the millage is passed, we will do this. And if you have a resolution or a board vote on that, that might be a different story than if you're saying, this is going to happen. Because if you don't know, or you don't have any facts to support it that's actually happened, then that could be aspirational as well. The other thing I caution about not giving out patron lists to your ballot question committee, because it might violate library privacy. Again, in meeting room, don't allow the vote yes committee to meet in your meeting room, but then say that the vote no committee can't meet in the meeting room. So think about all these issues with your policies. Again, I already talked about this a minute. The section 57 prohibits using public funds for local ballot proposals, but it does have factual information. Public body employees without policymaking authority are prohibited from expressing views on behalf of the public body under the Michigan Campaign Finance Act. What this means is don't put your staff in the position where they're answering questions about your ballot. And the easiest way to do that is to put some sort of promotional material at the circulation desk, because then the idea is that patron could come in and look at that and say, start asking questions, because you can't spend public money promoting a campaign, right? And public money means also the salary of your staff. So if your staff is like, oh, you got to vote for it, it's so wonderful, we'll be able to do all these things that you couldn't write in the written material, that's going to be a problem. So really be careful about, the unintended consequences of handing out bookmarks or handing out promotional materials within the library. And also really, if you're a library director, you shouldn't be working on any ballot question committee stuff during the workday. Technically your salary is also public funds. Don't use your copier, for example, to print flyers for the ballot question committee if you wouldn't do that for any other group. So treat everybody equally on those fronts. And we're getting a little late on time. So again, vote yes or vote for the library. Talk to your lawyer about things. I've had a lot of libraries that like cut it close, that want to wear buttons around the library that say vote, and there's some risks on that, and that should be something that, depending on what the button says and how it's worded and how it's portrayed, that's a discussion between you and your lawyer. The other question I have is that the library will say, well, it's not public money because it was a gift to us. Well, if it's a gift to the library and that is public money. So someone will say, well, we're not going to spend tax. There's no difference under Michigan Campaign Finance for tax revenue versus other public money, state aid money, other types of public money, all public money for the purposes of Michigan Campaign Finance Act. I think I've already talked about this too, the equal opportunity with the library meeting rooms. And then I think that is it. And I'm a little bit over, and I appreciate your patience. I talked a little bit more than I thought I would. I don't know if anybody has any other questions, or
we actually have another like 20 minutes, and for if anyone has any questions, or if you have anything else you want to say.
I have lots to say, but not probably about ballots.
Here's your soapbox, Ann.
Oh, I have lots to say.
No,
but,
I hear you.
If you want me to talk more about millages, I'm happy to do it.
Does anybody have any questions? You can unmute and ask, or you can put it in chat.
I'm going to stop my sharing.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So we want to put our millage on the ballot for next year in 2024. When should we get with you to talk about the language, like now, or should we wait till next spring? Because we're probably going to do it in August.
So August ballot is it's mid-May is when the ballot is due.
Right.
So I would start working on it 2 or 3 months ahead of time.
Okay.
The issue that's really tricky, and I didn't get into this too much with the law, so your lawyer, or me in this case, about that, is that there's actually like kind of a legal impossibility within the law right now, because, and I can't remember the exact dates, Claire. I meant to pull this out, but if the ballot, I think, if the ballot is after April 30th, right, you have to use, like, if you're going for a renewal, let's just use that 0.87 or 0.97 renewal. That's your renewal. So in 2023, you're going to levy 0.97. Okay. If you go in August of 2024, you have to use the new 2024 millage reduction number. Okay. The Headley rollback number for 2024.
Right.
You might not have that before the ballot deadline.
Right.
Okay, so that's why I don't like going way too early, because if there's a possibility that you could, and I say this, and it hasn't been challenged, because I think if you don't have that information, it's a legal impossibility for you to do that. And so far it hasn't been challenged, but those are the types of things you can talk about with your attorney. But if you were to prepare that in, a year ahead of time, you're not going to have the right renewal numbers.
Okay, so we are going for an increase. We do have a Headley rollback. Would we need to add that on if we're going for an increase, or we just do a straight increase, do you think?
Is it, are you going for a renewal part or?
No.
Okay. Do you have a perpetual millage?
No. We have a 10-year, so it expires next year.
But I guess my question is, are you going for a renewal, or are you going to call all of it new millage?
We're just going to call it all new.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a good example. Let's just say it's been rolled back to 0.9 mil. You can say, can we levy 1 mil, of which 0.9 mil is renewal and 0.1 mil is additional new millage, in one question.
Okay, but ours is actually, we're at 0.5, but we're only getting 0.4 something, and then we're going to go for 1 mil. So
I see.
Over,
so yes,
right.
You are that. Remember, I talked those 3 scenarios. Yes. You're the one that you can characterize it as new millage. Yes. And then you might not have to wait as long, because if you're going to go for 1 mil new millage, you don't have to wait for those rollback factors, because you're not addressing those.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Let's see.
Is there anyone else who has a question?
Can the Friends be a ballot question committee or be a separate group? I know you're going to get into this at the next session, but the Friends, this is a really important thing, because people always talk about, they'll say, oh, the Friends are going to do that. The Friends are going to do that. They are separate entities. They can consist of the same people, but they are separate entities. So you might get if you've got 3 board members on the Friends, those might be the same 3 people that are doing the ballot question committee, but the Friends is a separate entity from the ballot question committee. In Gratiot County, the county levied a millage and then contracted services with each of his levy. In that sense, I'm assuming the county commissioners are the one who had to. Yeah. So there's a couple ones that are countywide millages. And typically the county board of commissioners approves the ballot proposal, and then it lists all the libraries in the county that it's going to go to. There's oftentimes there is a contract also in place that requires the county to levy the millage, and then describes how that countywide millage is going to be divvied up among the libraries. So yes, typically the answer is the libraries themselves typically don't approve those ballot proposals, but should be involved in figuring out the allocation and possibly a party to a contract with the county on how that's going to be allocated. If that did not answer the question, let me know. We're going for a ballot this May. If the ballot's not approved, we'll be forced to dissolve the library. That is sort of a different issue. That's a winding down. That's something, Linda, we might need to talk about, because there's some legal issues with that.
Dorothy holds a township library.
Yeah. I don't know that there's specific resources, because it hasn't happened really. And so we just kind of need to talk about how that happens, but I'm happy to talk with you about that. Let's see, our current millage was 2016 to 2025, and it's 0.5 mils. Should we have it on the ballot in 2025? So you can still levy in 2025. Oh, and this is an important issue that I don't think I have covered, so I want to cover it now. The issue with the timing can affect the Headley rollbacks. So if you go for a ballot you can still levy in 2025 and you go in 2025 for a ballot and the first year of levy is in 2026. Oh, I see Shirley there too. So Shirley is the resident expert on all things millages. So I didn't see her. You popped up all of a sudden, Shirley. So if you have anything to add or if there's marketing questions, Shirley can help. But so if it's in 2025 and the first year of levy is 2026, your millage will be rolled back one time before you first levy it. So if let's just say your first levy is in December of 2025 and you go for the millage in 2025 and you go for 1 mil, you will be able to levy that full mill in 2025. If you have a vote for 1 mil in 2025 and the first year of levy is 2026, the millage that you levy in 2026 will be rolled back one time. That's why sometimes libraries even want to go 2 years ahead of time. Then it would be rolled back twice before you first levy it. Also, there's a little bit of a nuance about what you can call a renewal. And so I know a lot of libraries who have gone 2 years ahead of time, and I haven't seen anything that's really prohibits it, but there are some, I guess, legal issues that you should talk to your attorney about that too. So I hope I answered the question. Yeah, that you can have it in 2026. You have 2 opportunities in 2026 to get on the ballot. It's just a little riskier because the millage is most libraries, I think, want that little cushion to make sure that their funding is in place before their millage actually expires. But it's still possible to do it in 2025 or 2026. Any other questions? All right, I don't see any hands up or any more questions. I appreciate your patience. It's a little bit of a dry subject, and so I appreciate that. And if you guys have any questions, you have my contact information, and happy to talk.
It's an important subject, so it might be a little dry, but it's very, very important. So
Yep.
all of you, please read your stuff. Read your establishment law. Read carefully.
Yeah, do your homework. Figure out who you are, and then I think I think Lisa asked about the timing. Again, I do caution that if you haven't done a millage in a while, pull out your old ballot language, figure out what the process was. If based on this, you might want to consider changing the process with the prosecutor or other things, reach out to those people, start that process a little bit ahead of time to give yourself some room.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
We want to thank Anne. Thank you so much, Anne, as always, for doing this.
Thank you.
Bye everybody. Thank you. Please join us next week when we'll be talking about yes committees and ballot committees.